For those who don't know me, my name's Jen Farmer. I am the CEO at the Friedreich Ataxia Research Alliance. I'm joined today by several colleagues, Barbara Tate, FARA's Chief Scientific Officer, Kellen Madden, our Patient Engagement Manager, and Dr. Kathy Matthews, who's on our board, and a clinician scientist from University of Iowa. And I'll give Dr. Matthews more of an introduction a little later in our agenda. So as we get started, I first want to recognize and thank our sponsors. These sponsors help support all of FARA's community education events throughout the year, our webinars, as well as our in-person education events. Without them, we would not be able to do all these great education opportunities. And then for today's webinar, we want to focus on the FA treatment pipeline. Earlier this year, in fact, the last several months, May, June, July, we had updates from several industry partners who are advancing specific programs. And today, what we're going to do is kind of take a different view, a higher level view, and really help folks understand this treatment pipeline. When do programs get added to the pipeline? What is FARA doing to help fill the pipeline? Or what programs do we have in place that help accelerate different programs as they come into the treatment pipeline? And then where can you find information about these programs? And then we're going to move into talking about clinical trials and how to participate, how to find information again. And then with Dr. Matthews, we're going to have a moderated Q&A for, how to approach decision-making about trials. And then we're going to open it up to all of you for your questions. So Barbara, I'm going to hand it over to you to get us started for an overview on the pipeline and kind of FARA's strategy.
Thanks so much, Jen. And as Jen said, I'm Barbara Tate. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at FARA. And I'm really pleased to be here to be able to talk about the pipeline, because this is the fruits of all our labor, of all of your fundraising and bike riding and all the work that we do. The ultimate outcome is to get a pipeline like this of potential treatments for FA. The graphic that you see in front of you is available on the FARA website. And what we're going to do today is just talk a bit about the graphic itself, how we lay out potential treatments in the pipeline. We're not going to take a deep dive into any one of these, but just talk more generally about how you can use this resource to understand what's in the pipeline and make decisions for yourself about how to become involved. So the first thing we're going to cover is the top of this graphic, where we see the grade area with different phases of development. We're going to talk about that first. Then we'll go into the side of the graphic where the color coding is, and we'll maintain that color coding throughout the presentation. So we'll talk about how therapeutics could function. So the first part is, how does something go through the stages of development? And then what kind of therapeutics, what's the mechanism of action of therapeutics in the pipeline? So the next slide, and Kellen is giving you links to the places on the website where you can find things. Yeah, let's do the whole build, Jen. I think there's one more click. Thank you. So across the top, there are stages that every program goes through, whether it's a small molecule or a large molecule, whether it's a gene therapy or protein therapy. There are very specific stages that are necessary in order for us to get to the final outcome of an approved treatment. We show these as if they're equal. They're not. They're not equal in time or effort or cost. But for just simplicity, we're showing them as if they're all equal stages. The first two stages, discovery and preclinical development, are the laboratory work. And we do not show these on the pipeline generally because there's a huge amount of turnover in this space. it's unpredictable in timeline, it's unpredictable in success. It's where ideas are brought forward, they're tested in a laboratory setting, they're either discarded or they move forward. When we get into what's called preclinical development, we've taken a target and we've made a commitment to it. That is, the sponsor of that program has made a commitment to that target. They said, I think this is the target I want to go after. This is the mechanism I want to explore in people. This is the way I'm going to do it. Either it's a gene therapy or a protein or a small molecule. Now there's a series of obligatory testing that has to occur in both cell and animal models to demonstrate that that approach is safe and enough data to convince us and the regulatory agencies that it could be beneficial, that there is a potential for a clinical benefit. Once we have that package, and it's hundreds of pages, the sponsor will file that package with a regulatory agency. In the US, that's the FDA, and we call that an IND, or an investigative new drug package. In the EU, that's called a CTA, or a certificate for trial application. I actually forget what the C stands for. So that is our first filing, and all of that preclinical work that we did is in that document. And again, it's hundreds of pages often. Once the regulatory agency has looked through that document, there's sometimes a robust dialogue with the sponsor. And once that has been completed and they're satisfied that there's enough data to support that this is safe, could be beneficial, the first clinical trials are started. The first human dosing is started. In some cases, with a small molecule, for instance, that can be in someone that doesn't have FA, what we call a healthy volunteer phase 1 trial. But in some cases, for instance, gene therapy, it's unethical to give someone who's healthy, who doesn't have FA, a gene, because it would permanently change them. So the phase 1, that safety trial, and phase 2, safety plus efficacy, are combined. So that's in those new cutting edge technologies. You sometimes see phase 1 and phase 2, or phase 1/phase 2 together. In people that have FA, we can assess both safety and does this give clinical benefit or efficacy. In a healthy volunteer, we wouldn't be able to do that. We just assess safety. So we've got phase 1 and phase 2 then that are looking at safety in a small number of people and then a larger number of people, as well as does this give any benefit? Does it do what it's supposed to do? But that small number of people has to be broader, because there's often, or sometimes, with certain therapeutics, we see a very rare event in people. And we need to know, if it's 1 in 20 or 1 in 50, we need to have dosed enough people to make sure that we don't miss that rare event. So that's why more and more people are brought into the trial, to make sure, again, that the efficacy holds up over a number of people and a number of different who have different aspects of characteristics, and that there's no safety signal that's very rare but shows up once we've done more people. Once we've gotten through that, again, a big data package is put together and given to the regulatory agency. In the US, that's an NDA. In the EU, that's an MAA, or marketing authorization application. The regulatory agency will go through those documents, again, have a dialogue with the sponsor, and either say thumbs up or thumbs down. And then we say available to patients. So in some ways that can be a theoretical, because there's still work that needs to be done to actually get that therapeutic in the hands of patients. But now there's regulatory approval to do that. Let's go to the next slide, Jen. So we talked about, this is the same steps that you saw on the previous slide in a horizontal way. Now they're a vertical way. Again, we have the discovery, preclinical, regulatory, clinical trials, approval, and access. So saying the funnel presentation here is supposed to help you understand a lot of things go into the discovery stage. There's a lot of attrition. There's a lot of learning that occurs in that stage, but it is, again, unpredictable in terms of time and money and success. So we do not represent that on the pipeline. We do represent programs that have moved forward into preclinical development. They're testing the drug in animals or in cellular models or both. And they've committed now to this target and to this therapeutic. So that's when we start to learn more about the trial, where we're watching it more carefully, and we're looking for that first regulatory filing. So that's when you'll see things appear on the pipeline. Note the numbers at the top can be a little sobering, and that there's tens of thousands of compounds, especially in small molecule, that go into this funnel with very few that come out the other end. That attrition rate is different for what we call biologics, gene therapy or protein or messenger RNA. Those don't have the same attrition rate, but when we get to clinical trials, again, they're not doing all that much better than the small molecules. So there's still attrition at the level of once we start trials. Often with small molecules, it's because they just don't do what they're supposed to do. We've done really well at developing systems to look at safety of those. So it's often in the clinical trial of a small molecule, it just doesn't have the efficacy that we wanted. But with these newer, with these newer approaches, sometimes it's the safety that we have to deal with in that. All right, so Jen wants me to move on, so I'll move on to the next slide. So we talked about the things at the top. Let's go down on the side now. So this color-coded buckets of approaches are by mechanism of action or by the way these are supposed to work. So we bucketed them together and color-coded them so that you could keep track of which things are supposed to have the same kind of activity. Like, for instance, the gene addition. You see a bunch of purple molecules there. These are gene addition. They're all gene replacement approaches. So they're all clustered together in the purple. And the length of that chevron indicates the phase that the program is in. So the next slide, let's talk a little bit about Friedreich's ataxia, just to give you some foundational knowledge to help us understand how do we get to choose which of those mechanisms we want to prioritize and go after. It is a genetic disease, so there is a gene that's affected in people with FA. Everybody has this gene, that FXN gene. Everybody has some GAA repeats within the gene, but with FA, the repeats become much, much longer. So they go into the hundreds and even into the thousands. When those repeats are present in the gene struggles to produce the protein, the frataxin protein. So if the more the repeats, the lower the amount of protein you're able to make. And that deficit in the protein is what actually yields the symptomology that we call FA. That protein has a critical function in cells. In fact, in a subset of organelles within a cell, so a smaller organelle within a cell called the mitochondria. Mitochondria are crucial to producing energy for the cell, but also for detoxifying things that we find in the cell as the process of energy production moves forward. Without frataxin, the mitochondria can't do those two roles very well. So you have the low cellular energy that we're very familiar with that manifests itself in people with FA as fatigue, as changes in heart and cerebellar function. It changes in muscle function. We don't fully understand how the lack of frataxin causes changes, for instance, in the cerebellum, but we know that frataxin replacement, at least in animal models, has successfully reversed those symptomologies. Okay, the next slide shows you, okay, so we have these aspects of the disease that we understand. We understand that mitochondria are not functioning properly. So there's been a huge focus in the pipeline in that red bucket, things that could improve mitochondrial function or conversely, reduce the toxins that mitochondria are important in modifying and controlling. So those are approaches under the red bucket that are very focused on the mitochondria. We also know that frataxin has this role in metabolism more generally. So maybe even if the mitochondria are compromised, we could rescue some of the metabolic changes that occur in FA. And that would give people more function. So we are looking at things that are downstream of frataxin. There is, of course, an obvious approach where we would replace the protein. The protein is missing or is lower in quantity than we need. So how about we just replace the protein? And that is a therapeutic approach that's in the clinic. In addition to replacing the protein, we could maybe take the protein that's there and keep it for a longer period of time, or add something to it, a chaperone, another protein that could help it function better. There's also, we talked about the gene itself is silenced. Now it's quieted. Silence is maybe not completely silenced. Some frataxin expression is always happening, but it's a lot less than we would like to see. So is there a way that we could reverse that? Is there a way that we could overcome those GA repeats and actually have the gene express more, have more protein produced? Finally, what about just adding cells that have normal genes, taking your cells, altering them in some way to allow the expression of frataxin, putting those cells back, or skipping the cells altogether and adding the gene itself so that you have another copy of a frataxin gene, one that doesn't have GA repeats and that could produce enough frataxin for you to be well. Finally, there's also those GA repeats. There's technology that now can alter those repeats, can get rid of them altogether, or can add little interruptions in the repeats so that the gene can function better. So the next slide will show you how is FARA helping to pull these treatments forward. And the first thing I'm going to focus on is our more discovery, preclinical work that we're doing, things that we're doing also in the clinic. They're more in the coming out of the grant program. So one thing I'll show you is these are all investigators that have been funded by FARA. There are many, many, many more investigators that have been funded by FARA under each of these categories, but I just picked a few as a representative of the kinds of funding that we do, that you have facilitated through all of your efforts to help raise funds for FARA. For instance, under symptomology, we have a large grant that we give, the Branya J. Keats Award. It's a larger research award. We've given it to this investigator to see if there's a way that he can alter cerebellar firing to be able to relieve some of the ataxia. We also have several general grants that are represented here. These are 2-year awards that we give investigators to help us move projects from the discovery through the preclinical stage. We also offer funding through institutional awards. So this is when we found a group of investigators who together form a nucleus of FA investigators. They have different skills, different interests. They come together and we fund them through the institution to work together to help bring forward treatments. And 2 examples are here. You see Shana McCormick at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the Center of Excellence for FA Research, and she's an endocrinologist that's looking at bone health and diabetes. And on the other far end, you see David Liu. He's an investigator at the Broad at MIT and Harvard at the Friedreich Ataxia Accelerator. And he's one of the key leading investigators looking at how can we edit the frataxin gene, do something with the repeats so that the gene can be reactivated. And finally, we have a really interesting award that's short, a smaller amount of money. It's a one-year award that we call the Award for Innovative Mindset. And this is when investigators say, I have a great idea, but I don't have a lot of data to support it. And we are able to provide for them a one-year grant to help them generate the data to support their great idea. And then they can come back and apply for more funding from us or from other people. So across the spectrum, you see that we fund in that out of our research grant area, lots of different ways that we help support scientists and researchers to move forward new therapeutic approaches. Next slide, Jen. But that's not all that FARA does. Yeah, let's do the whole build. In addition to funding that discovery and preclinical phase, you have contributed as well to tools and things that would help support programs across the board. For instance, the natural history studies. Those natural history data have been critical and continue to be critical to programs as they understand the disease better and they can make better choices about how to go about developing clinical trials. If you've given a skin sample or a blood sample, you've contributed to us helping to develop model systems that we can use to test therapeutics. In addition, if you're part of the registry, you've been part of a study, FARA helps the industry partners recruit for studies. They help them find people who can participate in studies and serve on their safety advisory boards so that they can move through these clinical phases. The clinical sites that FARA funds are really critical. This allows a sponsor to come forward and say, you already have investigators that are up and running. They know FA, they know how to run some of the outcome measures that we're going to need in our clinical trials. This is huge. This is really an enabler. And that's all through, the commitments that you have all made to help us support that system, that consortium. In addition, FARA does attend regulatory meetings, both at the FDA and hopefully in ex-US sites, to just be there as the patient representative. Give your perspective on what's important to you and how to help regulatory agencies understand the impact that these therapeutics could have on your lives. And that goes on to testimony at regulatory hearings, which I know many of you have participated in. And finally, we're learning now with our first approval that our job is not done. There's still work to be done in communicating the value of that approved drug, in helping with payers understanding the value of it. And then, of course, there's also, once the drug is approved, additional research that happens to confirm that it is in fact safe for the community. I think that's, I have one more slide to tell you. Just the summary again of the pipeline. Remember that this is available on the website. Go in, take a look. I think we might be able to put the link here. It's under research and development pipeline. You can go in and you can see each program in detail there. Lots of really important information, including about clinical trials for those programs. I know this is a lot to take in, so I hope you will go to the website. The other thing on the next slide that's available is for a couple of select programs, as Jen said, we've had the opportunity to listen from the sponsors and to record webinars with the sponsors. Those recordings are also available on the website. So you can go and you can actually listen to some of these. So there's lots of reading you can do, lots of listening you can do. And of course, we're always available to answer questions. So thanks again for the opportunity to tell you all about this and for all of the contributions you've made to make sure we do have a pipeline to talk about today. And I'm going to turn it back to Jen, who's going to talk about clinical trials.
Barbara, thank you so much. That was a great overview to the pipeline, to how we support research to bring new things into the pipeline, how we as a community try and facilitate progress through clinical development towards approvals and getting therapies to our global FA community. We wanted to take a little bit more time to talk about, your direct role in facilitating research and participating in the development of treatments. And that is very directly through participating in clinical research or clinical trials. So when we talk about clinical research, there's kind of two main types of research. One is a clinical trial where there's an intervention that's being tested. Most of the time, that's a therapy, which could be a small pill or an injectable, but it can also be something like the one example Barbara gave, where they're looking at stimulation. It can be a device where you're looking at stimulating a part of the brain to see if that helps alleviate some of the symptoms. But anytime there's an intervention of any kind that's being tested, we call that a trial. And then the other type of clinical research are what we call studies or observational studies. And those are things like natural history studies, biomarker studies, where we're really trying to learn more about the condition or finding new tools that we can use in future interventional studies to measure how things are going. All of these are considered research. So these are all experiments, and they all require your participation. So just a few reminders. We do have a clinical trial 101 guide that Kellen's going to put in the chat. It's available on the website. You can download it. We have hard copies too, if you prefer that really go into more explanation about clinical trials. But there's some important things to really consider when you're participating in research. These, as I said, this is research. These are experiments. There are protocols and procedures that need to be followed to try and make sure that at the end of the day, we get an accurate answer about this particular therapy in terms of whether or not it works. And so, being able to attend all the clinic visits and comply with the protocol is really important, as well as following through on, what's being asked. One thing we talk about a lot in the FA community is like, what can we say when we're in a clinical trial? And the reason we talk about that is because if you're participating in a clinical trial and you start sharing with other community members things you're feeling and experiencing, that could create bias if that other person is also participating in the clinical trial, because maybe they're not experiencing the same things you are. And so we really want people to remain blinded or, unbiased in research studies. That's true also for the investigators, that they remain blinded as well, and to really make sure that we are conducting high quality research so that we get the answers that we need to move treatments forward. And there's always, your feedback as you participate in research is always welcome. And it's important that you share your feedback with the clinical teams you're working with. FARA is always here to receive your feedback. We're always trying to facilitate conversations with our industry partners or our investigators so that, they're learning as well from your experiences. We not only do we have information on all of the programs that Barbara was talking about in the pipeline on the website, but we also launched about a year ago a new part of our website called the Clinical Trial Finder. So all of the clinical research studies are listed here, both the trials and the studies. You can use some sort features that we now have on the website to look for all the active studies, to look for things that might be open in different age groups. For each of the studies, we have a lot of information available. And so you can click on any of the studies. Here, we've clicked on the natural history study that we call Unify. And you can see there's an overview. What is this study about? What are the details in terms of participation? Sometimes we can include things like what the frequency of the visits might be. We include all the study sites and kind of who you can contact if you're interested in participating. We're also trying to share on social media at least once a week highlighting a different research study that's open for participation, where we're recruiting, trying to find study volunteers. We also include a list in each of the monthly newsletters. So we're trying to remind you of these opportunities on a regular basis. So that kind of quickly gets us to, how do you decide whether or not to participate in a clinical trial? And it's important that you take time to understand what's involved in these research studies and gather as much information as you can, and talk to your physicians, your family members, trusted friends to help you through this decision process. Oftentimes participating in a trial or a research study, isn't just the study participant. It can also involve their caregivers, as well as interactions with their healthcare providers. And so rely on these folks to help you in the process. And so to do that today and to continue the discussion, I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Kathy Matthews, who is a FARA board director. She is the principal investigator of multiple FA studies at the University of Iowa, both the natural history study as well as clinical trials. Dr. Matthews brings to our FA community a lot of experience from the neuromuscular disease community, both from where they've got more clinical trials and approved therapies. So having that ability to learn from others is incredibly valuable. And I just want to share with all of you that Dr. Matthews this year was recognized by the Muscular Dystrophy Association for her significant contributions across neuromuscular diseases with the MDA Legacy Award for Achievement in Clinical Research. And so congratulations, Dr. Matthews, and thank you so much for joining us today and having this conversation about clinical trials.
Thank you, Jen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let me stop sharing my slides. There we go. So maybe a first question for you, based on your experience being an investigator and physician in a lot of clinical trials, what do you think are the most important topics to discuss with someone when they're considering participation in a trial or a study?
A lot of topics, and some of them you've already mentioned. So things that first of all, you need to read the informed consent document, because that's going to tell you what's involved. So some of the things that I think you really need to think about carefully is the frequency of visits. How far away is this site? How long does the study and do the visits last? And ask yourself very realistically, and this is where Jen mentioned talking to your family and others who are impacted, do I have the time and the energy and the bandwidth in my busy life to participate in this trial? Because some trials are relatively low intensity, some are extremely intensive. So you really have to ask yourself, is this trial one that I can realistically participate in? For a lot of people, what is involved in the trial, does it involve biopsies? Does it involve anesthesia? Does it involve invasive procedures? If you faint every time you get your blood draw, how many blood draws are involved? So is what is going to happen to you something that you really are up for and in agreement with? And are all those things mandatory, or sometimes they may not be? And then sort of the nitty gritty of the drug. So Barbara talked about the safety trials. What do we know about the safety of the drug? What phase is this? Are you going to be the first human to get this drug, or maybe the second or third? Or are there 40 people who've gotten this drug and we know a lot more about the safety? Or is this a repurposed drug? Is this a drug that was used to treat hypertension and now we're repurposing it to try to treat some aspect of FA? We're going to have a lot more safety data on that drug. So think about, what safety data do we know? And is the safety something that you're in agreement with? Couple more things. What is the expected benefit? Is this a disease modifying drug, or is this arrested that is going to slow progression? Is this something that the hope is that it's going to stop the disease right where it is? Friedreich is a very complicated disease, so it's unlikely that we're going to have one silver bullet that's going to treat everything. So is this a drug that is just going to treat the heart? Is this going to just treat the pancreas? Is this going to treat something that is important to you potentially? And yeah, that's sort of, so what, and is the treatment going to be dramatic or maybe modifier? And when I say expected to be, I want to emphasize that this is a clinical trial. We have no idea whether or not it's going to work. So I'll probably come back to that. Yeah, those are some of the main things that I think I tell people to think about.
Dr. Matthews, you mentioned the informed consent form and earlier I was saying we have some information on our website about these therapies and about the trials, but yeah, the informed consent form is the one place, right, where all the information is contained. And sometimes that's overwhelming because it's like 15 pages long and it's just really dense because there's so much. But when do people typically, like, when can people see a consent form? How do they get access to that?
So I can speak for ourselves. If you have, you've gone to the FARA website, you've identified a trial that you might be interested in. There's a contact thing there. So if you are in the, if you, at first pass might qualify, you're in the right age group and you definitely have FA and you're interested, very often the coordinator will be able to send you, if the trial is open and enrolling, they can send you a copy of the informed consent document before you do anything. And in fact, it is really mandatory that you have a copy of the informed consent document to read at your leisure, at home, prior to signing anything. So, I mean, if you're signing an informed consent document to have your blood pressure taken, fine, don't read it. But if it's a clinical trial and there are going to be things that happen to you, you want to read all
Yeah.
the overwhelming words, highlight the things you don't understand, write questions in the margins, talk to your primary doctor, your primary neurologist or primary provider about it if you have questions, and then go back and talk to the coordinator. I didn't understand this section. I didn't understand this section. So make sure before you sign it that you understand exactly what you're getting into within the limits of what anybody can tell you in a clinical trial setting.
Great, thank you. And the clinical trial 101 guide that Kellen put the link in for, we actually have a whole section on informed consent, and some of those questions that you just discussed, like things you should be asking yourself, information you should be looking for, are kind of outlined for you there to kind of help you with a question and answer for each of those. So you can kind of go through and make a list of, what do I know about this? And what do I know about the safety? What do I know about the potential benefit? How many people? So trying to just, because there's a lot of things to consider, as you mentioned.
And that resource in the FARA site is outstanding, and I've sometimes recommended people with other diseases go to it. So FARA has done a great job. So I encourage people to look at that resource.
Thank you. So there are currently multiple clinical trials open for FA, which is great. And so people might be in a situation where they have choices and they have to choose, do I participate in this trial or do I participate in this one over here? And so what are some of the strategies you suggest for people to kind of assist them in this decision process of which study do I participate in?
So a lot of the things that I already said. another thing is that I wanted to mention is that not everybody is going to make the same decision about trials. And the fact that your best friend on social media is doing this trial and thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread doesn't mean that it's the right trial for you. So I tell people that these decisions are individual, they're specific to my situation, my family, my status, and nobody else can make it for you. I think the sort of big things, the top three that I think of are location and related to that impact on your life. If you're trying to go to school full time and this requires that you have a visit every 3 days and you are, 5 hours from the nearest study site, this may not be the time for you to do this trial. So again, think about the impact on your site. And then risk benefit ratio, I think, is balancing what is the important goal for you in participating in a trial.
And there's also, I think, another element to kind of this decision making that's coming into play for the FA community right now, where there may be trials coming. So there's a trial open right now that I qualify for, but this other therapy on the pipeline, their trial is going to start in maybe 6 or 12 months. And, again, how do we decide, do I participate in the trial that's open right now or wait for something that might be a little bit further along?
So number one, we make decisions in life based on what information we have today, so you give yourself grace. So if you participate in a trial of a drug that didn't work and then something else did, you don't beat yourself up. So you make the best decision for you in the time that you have with the information you have. Having said that, aside from all the other things that we've been talking about on this webinar, um, it's important to think about your age and your stage of disease. So if the trials are expected to require that you be independently able to walk and you're having trouble with that and you really want to be in a trial, you might do the earlier trial because you may not qualify for the second one. Similarly, if you think that the age range, if you're at an age, one's targeting children and you're almost an adult or something like that. So think about your age and stage of disease as one additional thing to add to those decisions about now or later. Recognizing that we need all of these trials. We need small molecules, we need genetic therapies, and that there is no wrong decision. So anything you participate in helps. The one other thing to think about that I think I didn't mention, a gene therapy trial may preclude you from participating in any future trials. So very often, once somebody has gotten gene therapy, you then are not eligible for a minimum of 5 or more years to participate in a future trial because it will muddy the analysis of any other factors. So you might think about that too.
I think you gave us a lot of good nuggets right there. Like, I'm writing them down super fast, but I love, I think your first comment about giving ourselves grace is really important. And, you have to make the decisions that you can at the time. And with a disease like FA that's progressive, time is critical. And, we can't predict the future. And so to just be kind to yourselves in this process, and that there's no wrong or right, there's no right answer here. We don't have that crystal ball, is really important. So you started talking about gene therapies, and so maybe we should just take another minute for those, because we've had one gene therapy trial start in FA, the phase 1 study to treat the cardiac aspects of FA. That phase 1 trial is now complete. We've got several other gene therapy programs in development that are likely to start clinical trials soon. And so there are unique considerations for gene therapies. And you mentioned one of them, which is if you participate in a gene therapy, you might not be eligible for other therapies. What are some of the other unique aspects to gene therapies that you feel require additional consideration or thought by both patients, families, care providers?
Yeah. So one thing that is a little bit more unique to FA compared to some of the other diseases that are being treated with gene therapy or being studied as possible gene therapy treatment diseases is that FA affects multiple different organs. And gene therapy in general does not affect, cannot be targeted to the brain, the muscle, the pancreas, the heart, all at the same time. So you need to think about what is this gene therapy program targeting, what might be modified by it. So that's something that's a little bit different about Friedreich ataxia because it is complex and multi-system. And then there are some considerations that apply to gene therapy as a class. So across systemic gene therapies, when you get gene therapy, you get bazillions of viral particles injected into a vein. Typically, it could be other brain, spinal cord, CSF, eye. But anyway, it's injected large numbers of viral particles. And there can be immune reaction to those. So there are certain risks that come with just getting a big bolus of gene therapy, and that can be nausea and vomiting, it can be kidney damage, it can be heart damage, it can be bad liver damage, and there have across different diseases and different gene therapy programs, death is one of the potential side effects of getting gene therapy, whether that's in an experimental program or commercially. So for gene therapy, I think you have to, and I've had families say, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give my child or myself this option. I feel strongly I want to do it. And that's great, but you have to recognize that the risks of a small molecule, something that you take by mouth, generally don't include death. And once we give gene therapy, we can't take it back out of your body. So if there's a bad effect, we have to treat the bad effect. We can't just stop the therapy. I guess I mentioned not participating in future trials, and then viral shedding, so that people around you, there's some limitations for the first several months, because you're going to shed that virus, and you don't want somebody around you to not be a candidate for gene therapy in the future because they have antibodies to the virus that they got from being around you. So there are some logistic things the first few months.
Yeah, so for some of our FA families where there may be multiple people in the family affected by FA, there could be this additional concern of, well, I'm participating in this trial right now. I need to create a certain amount of distance from my other family members. Yeah.
Right. Live with grandma for a few months, or the other child live with grandma for a few months. Yeah. So there are a lot of considerations that are unique to gene therapy.
Yeah. Thank you for kind of taking us through some of those at a quick high level, and these are all things that we're going to continue to talk about as we, have more gene therapy trials come forward. We've got a new page on the website that talks about gene therapy, just the basics. What is it? How does it work? Talks about the viruses, this immune response that you mentioned. We're also planning some additional educational materials to kind of help the community understand. But, I think making sure that folks take the time to talk to folks like yourself, to really make sure that they understand the potential safety issues, as well as the potential benefits, as well as the longer term implications are really important. I know we've got some questions maybe that are starting to come in. So Kellen, should I kind of give you a chance to share with us some of the questions?
Sure. Yeah, we actually only have one question right now, so I'd invite anyone who has any questions for our speakers who are experts in FA and FA research to put them in the Q&A specifically. But we can go to the first one, which is a question about whether sensory nerves in the skin that are part of the peripheral nervous system are also affected by FA.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for the question. And it is true that not only the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, but those nerves that come out of the spinal cord and go into muscles and skin and other organs seem to have changes or dysfunction that's associated with FA. And we are trying to investigate whether those changes are something that are reversible, but also are they useful in understanding and being able to measure them and then seeing whether a therapeutic can make them more functional again. That would be a very nice biomarker to have.
Maybe while we wait to see if anyone else has questions, I don't know if all three of you would want to answer this, but is there anything that's happening with FA research right now or any particular research areas that you're really excited about looking forward?
Who wants to go first?
I'll just say
Dr.
very
Matthews, I'll let you
I'll
go
say very
first.
generally that I'm excited that we have a drug that is approved because I wanted to say something about natural history studies and having a drug that it's approved. That combination of the robust natural history studies and an approved drug means that other companies can look at FA and say, oh, this is a disease that we have a shot at. You know, there's a patient population that's engaged, there are researchers, clinicians who are engaged, and you can show an effect. So that's what I'm excited for the future because I think we always have to have lots of different ways to attack the disease, lots of different mechanisms, and
Yeah.
we're in a good place.
Yeah, when we look at that treatment pipeline that Barbara reviewed, the fact that we have so many bars and in so many different colors is what I think is really important and what excites me as well. And you know, the fact that we're constantly challenging our research community to help us find more colors and help us find more bars, right? And there are a lot of people working on this and trying to do that. That's sometimes hard to see and experience if you're not, you know, seeing the grants come in yourself or if you're not following all the grants that we're funding. But that gives me a lot of optimism for the future.
Yeah, I agree, Jen. We've been excited about the diversity of grants that we get and the diversity of people. So new people that hadn't been applying for FA research, people that we didn't know, you know, so something like 30 or 40% of the grant applicants are new to the field. And that means they're bringing new ideas, they're bringing new technologies, you know, it's cutting edge place to be.
Maybe I'll just make a plug that, you know, because of where we are right now with an approved therapy, with multiple ongoing trials, new things coming forward, you know, it's important that folks who get a diagnosis of FA get connected as quickly as possible. You know, we want people to be able to access treatments as quickly as possible. And so, you know, helping build community and connect people to the resources, whether it's a clinical center, whether it's the website, whether it's another FA community member, is critically important. And now more than ever. And I worry about folks who, when they're diagnosed, are told there's nothing you can do. and they disconnect and they're not part of the community. And the need to kind of find those folks and bring them forward is now more important than ever.
We have a question that is related to research funding. Are there any adverse effects currently with research funding because of some of the different things that are going on with research funding at the federal level?
I think we could all answer this. Yeah, when the funding for research at the federal level gets cut, it will have an impact. That means that there are less grants that can be awarded for research across the board, and that will affect FA. We are in close contact with all of our researchers to continue to kind of monitor the situation. But I think it's still early. Like, a lot of what's going to happen is going to play out not in these first 6 months of a new administration, but years from now as well. And so, where we expect that if funding does get cut for the NIH, that will have a consequence. And I think some of the things that we've seen more recently is, when there are staffing cuts at the NIH and the FDA, that also impacts the pace of research, because these folks have critical jobs to help us, whether it's getting a grant reviewed, getting that grant contracted, when a new drug application gets submitted, getting it reviewed, doing audits out in the field. Like, all of those things are important and they're all part of the process. And when there are fewer people and fewer resources, it takes more time. And so those are the other things that we're concerned about with some of the cuts and changes that we've seen.
To add to what Jen's saying, I think right now people, you mentioned this, but I wanted to emphasize that people, very smart people who want to be scientists, are having a really long, hard look at what is going on and how their mentors are being affected. So there's no funding to support junior scientists, and I'm afraid that fewer and fewer people are going to be going through the training to get that science training. And that's the impact that 20 years from now, we're not going to have the people doing the cutting edge research. That's the worry. And the people on this call can be advocates much more than I can.
And FARA's advocacy team is following a lot of what's happening, and occasionally they do put out calls to action. So if anyone wants to be involved in those, you can sign up for the advocacy newsletter. Jen and Barbara, I don't know if you've been scrolling through the questions. We only have a minute left. If you've seen one that you would want to end on.
Maybe one quick thing is, there are some questions here that are specific to individual programs. And so, would encourage you to look on the pipeline page to see if that can help answer that question, or, we'll try and follow up with folks as well individually. Let's see. Barbara, do you want to take one final question?
There is a gene editing question, which is very exciting, and I will recommend that you find David Liu's either YouTube, or he's done some TED Talks on what gene editing is all about. He's very accessible. He is a funded investigator, and he can help you understand gene editing.
But it's essentially altering the gene mutation that causes the disease.
Yeah, so we would edit the part of the gene that has the GA repeats. Either we can slice them out, we can interrupt them so that they're not perceived as a very long piece of DNA, or there are changes even within the very individual letters, space editing that can be done. But he can walk you all through that.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists today, Dr. Matthews, Barbara, Kellen, for helping facilitate our webinar today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and participated and submitted questions. We'll try and follow up with folks who we might not have been able to answer directly, and we will share the materials on the FARA YouTube page along with all the links. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of summer.